expensive bourbons worth the money? Stick around as I dive into what makes a bourbon expensive and whether it's really worth that extra dollar. I'm Tim from Elma Wine and Liquor. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be diving into whether or not expensive bourbons are actually worth the money. But before we really get into that question, I want to start by talking about what makes a bourbon expensive, why some bourbons cost so much more, to help you make a decision of whether or not that actual price tag is worth it. So let's start with one of the most iconic bourbons out there, Pappy Van Winkle. This brand is synonymous with bourbon. Anybody that has gotten into bourbon at all is familiar with the brand. It is very hard to come by, and even at a regular retail price is kind of on the high end for a bourbon. This 15-year-old can retail, suggested manufacturer retail price in the $300-ish range, but chances are, if you've ever seen it on a retail shelf, it could go as high as $2,000, $3,000. One of the things that makes that bottle so expensive is the brand behind it. It's, like I said, become iconic. It is a very good product. It does taste delicious, but that brand is really what is driving the price of that product. Just like in any other industry, a lot of other products out there where a company builds a good brand, it gets a great reputation, gets a couple product placements in movies or mentions by athletes or actors, and all of a sudden everybody wants it. So branding is a big piece of what can drive the price of a bottle of bourbon. And even within the branding, in the bourbon community, in the bourbon world, we have kind of sub-brands of these master distillers that have built such a reputation for themselves. Harlan Wheatley at Buffalo Trace Distilling, who is making the Pappy Van Winkles these day and age. Jimmy Russell at Wild Turkey. Dave Pickerel formerly of Maker's Mark and many other brands before he unfortunately passed away. These are kind of sub-brand of people like this. They build these followings. People want their products because they know that they're going to produce good quality, and so the new brands that they're associated with can start charging more money, charging a premium for that recognition of quality behind the brand's name or the person's name. Another thing that drives price a lot of times in bourbon and in a lot of other industries as well is the packaging that goes into, or that the bourbon goes into, I guess. We have something like this from Lux Row Distilling, the Blood Oath, which comes in this big, giant, heavy box in a very fancy bottle as well. The type of cork that is used can influence it, the type of glass, the type of closure and capsule that goes into each product, how well it's sealed, whether it's a plastic versus a very fancy seal. All those little things start adding up for the distiller, which means that they need to add that price on to the wholesaler, who then adds it on to the retailer, who then add it on to the customer. And so each one of those steps exponentially adds some price to the product. That's why you see some bourbons just come in these classic cognac style bottle shape because it's mass produced and easy to get access to. And then some brands will spend a considerable amount more money to make these embossed glass unique offerings that stand out on the shelf, but cost them more money to do so in the process. Another factor that can really influence the price of bourbon is the amount of age that it has on it, how many years it spends aging in oak barrels. We know that to be called a bourbon, it has to age in new American oak barrels. It can age for a day and still be called bourbon, but it wouldn't really be good, and that would be a waste of a brand new barrel because then it can never be used again by the bourbon industry. So typically bourbon you'll see going anywhere from 2-4 years and up. Once there's different designations that they can hit at 2 years and 4 years. So a lot of bourbon you'll see a minimum of 4 years, but then you get bourbons like this Calumet that gets up to 15 years. This Pappy is 15. They also make a 20 and 23. They've released a 25 in the past. Calumet has some higher age releases. There's other brands out there that have done 25, 30-year-old bourbons. You see that a little bit more in the Scotch world, where you'll sometimes see 60-year-old Scotches. Every year that bourbon spends aging in the oak barrel, it is costing the distillery money, because time is money. It's costing them storage space. They've got to build these huge rickhouses to store all these barrels for a very long time. They have to buy the wood, they have to distill the product, and then it just sits there for, in these two cases, 15 years before they go and package it and sell it. So every year that it's sitting there, it's costing them money. They have to raise the price to make sure that they recoup their investment. They also lose more product the longer it sits there. Just naturally, some of the product is evaporating over time through the wood. And then there's also more likelihood that something happens. A leak forms in the barrel and they lose more of the product that way. Rickhouses collapse sometimes. So the longer the barrels are sitting there, the more likely they have exposure to rickhouse fires or collapsing buildings, just freak accidents like that can cost them money. So more exposure to potentially bad freak accidents. So all those add up and cost money. Another factor that can go into the price of the bourbon is just the rarity of it. So low production, like Pappy Van Winkle. Blood Oath is a brand from Lux Row that only comes out once a year. So that low production or rarity item, kind of unique offering, helps drive some of the price because it's a one-off. They can get more money for it. The alcohol, the amount of alcohol in the bottle. So for example, this new Riff single barrel is 112.5, which is a lot higher than your typical 80 proof bourbon or 90 proof bourbon that you'd see on a shelf in the retail store. And that is because when the bourbon is aging, it usually goes in the barrel at a very high proof, 120 plus, and as it's aging, sometimes it loses water content, so the alcohol goes up more. Sometimes it loses alcohol. It just depends on the environment that it's in. But the way that distilleries get the product from that high proof to a lower bottling proof is they just add water. So when you have one big barrel of high proof bourbon, you can make a lot more bottles of finished product if you add some more water into it before you bottle it. So with the higher proof bourbons, you're going to get less quantity for them to sell. So they need to charge a little bit more of a premium because they're selling less bottles. So the alcohol percentage plays an impact into the price of the bourbon as well. In line with some of the rarity aspects of bourbon is also this single barrel concept. As bourbon ages in a barrel, every single barrel is going to take on a slightly different taste and flavor profile because of the way the wood, it's different wood, it's a different spot in the warehouse so it evaporates or contracts and expands into the wood more or less. So every single barrel tastes a little bit different. And so those single barrels can influence the price because of that high demand for certain single barrel products, like Four Roses single barrels that are people go after quite excessively, like New Riff single barrels. We do store picks of, so we buy entire barrels that are bottled just for our particular store. Other stores do that as well, and you will never get that same product again. So there could be a slight premium put on those types of bottles because of that rarity as well. In the single barrel programs, you never really know, the distillery never really knows how many bottles they're going to get out of that barrel. We've seen barrels of bourbon that are supposed to be holding like 55 gallons only produce about 12 bottles when they're ready to bottle. And we've had barrels that have produced over 300 bottles because of the watering down and just they were full when they got dumped. So that discrepancy between each barrel means that the distillery needs to price everything consistently and put a premium on things so that they make sure that they're making their money. So those are all some of the key factors that go into the cost of the bourbon. So it's back to the question of, is expensive bourbon really worth it? It's tough to say. It can vary quite a bit depending on the brand and the product. Some brands, I'm not particularly singling out Blood Oath or any of these brands that are on the higher price side, are expensive partially due to the packaging costs or the bottle design or the age statements that are on them or just the brand that they have built up. Does that make it worth that extra price, that extra premium compared to another product that might be a little bit lower in price? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Unfortunately, there's really no clear-cut answer one way or another. It comes down to your personal preferences, your flavor, your palate, the way that you enjoy and taste the products. For one person, this bottle could be worth that $2,000 or $3,000. For another person, it's probably not even worth the $300 retail price. So every individual is going to have a slightly different impression of whether or not that expensive bourbon is really worth the price tag. It's just something you're going to have to kind of try and feel out for yourself. And you can very easily find affordable products that are just as delicious as more expensive products for an everyday drinker. I've done other videos such as our best bourbons under $50 that you can go take a look there and get a good starting point if you're just getting into bourbon, or even if you're an aficionado. Those are some great bottles under $50. These are also great bottles. If you find them at fair prices, definitely worth a try, even if you just start by finding them in a restaurant where you can get a pour at a more reasonable price than having to invest in an entire bottle. That's our video for today. Really hope you enjoyed it, found it valuable. Love to hear some feedback on some of the expensive bourbons that you've had and whether or not you thought they were worth the price that you paid. Please leave those notes in the comments below and let us know what you want to hear more about in the future. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons and share this with a friend. Cheers.